the time we are in and the need to ensure that they provide hope to the nation. Like I said before, it seems as though they looked at the budget presented over the years, copied and pasted into a document that says 2020, and decided, hey, we're going to just go with it, incorporating statements related, COVID-19 related. So I did not get that sense of hope. It's lacking from our authorities.
We live in a time that is not the same that we are accustomed to. And because of COVID 19, the pandemic, the crisis, there are a lot of issues that society face, the individuals face. And to me, I didn't see anything that really addressed it. Yes, I think there were mention of the Carlton home, which deals with drugs and alcohol. There was an increase in the incidences of suicide. And that could be correlated to depression. What was put in place? Was there any research conducted as to find out what the correlating factors were? How can we mitigate them? Were there, the budget did not seek to consider how or what programs were put in place for those affected. Yes, they spoke a lot about economic and other development, but how are we to develop and be resilient when our human capital is being affected with so many social issues?
And Jeremy?
Right. So there's a lot to dissect here. Of course, we're talking about a near 900-page document. I think what really stood out to me for sure was infrastructure. The purpose that it is the largest sector of the budget that has the largest cut of expenditure, right? As the government stated, infrastructure coupled with agriculture, wholesale and retail sectors, these will serve as a vanguard of economic recovery. And we've seen this before, right? This recovery model has been used before in the succeeding years of 2004 after Ivan. Now, to the young people who may not understand why infrastructure, right? Construction somewhat shelters the public. So if you look at Grenada as a web and an economic labyrinth, it connects every single component of our economy. So whether it's health, transport, agriculture, so on and so forth, right? It's also labor intensive. It creates a lot of jobs. So this is why we see a lot of job creation within the construction industry projected for next year. And of course, it's also a good economic trickle-down effect. Whereas small local businesses can benefit with these large capital programs. Of course, all of this is paired with robust private sector expansion. Now, what does this say to me as a young person? Nothing truly transformational, to be honest, right? Simply because implementation is highly questionable. That's the problem, right? And the main qualm I have with this government is that of cosmetic modification. This government is one of imagery. It focuses primarily on cosmetic modification. So we see buildings going up, we see roads being built, but at the expense of the core of the country, which is the people, right? So I'm urging to kind of highlight, that disproportionality of job creation. We need to talk about digital infrastructure, right? We need to talk about youth development. Of course, this is the whole point why we're here, right? The resilience of our local businesses. So all in all, it's a great attempt. Construction worked before. Theoretically, it should work again. But I think attempts on hope.
All right, thank you. We will speak on infrastructure and some of the points that you made a little later. But right now, let us zero in on allocations towards health. As we've stated, this year has been an unprecedented year in our lifetime, and it presented what many would consider an insurmountable or gargantuan challenge in the health sector. Based on this budget, do we feel that going into 2021, our health sector is properly fortified or will be properly fortified? Ashida?
Minister Steele, he confidently talked about the $94.9 million allocated to the health sector. And given that he has served in that capacity for such a long time, his confidence to me equaled satisfactory. Like he seemed satisfied with that allotment. I'm not going to question that. But one of the things that our country, the same challenges they've laid out before. So year after year after year, we are faced with the same healthcare challenges. And that is unacceptable. Because if every year you're gonna talk about the shortages of nurses and doctors, the inadequate dialysis services, and just overall health resources being available for our healthcare workers, then this is just pure ineffective governance in my view. And so in terms of our healthcare sector being prepared for, let's say, 2021 or 2022, I think not. Mention was made in terms of retention strategies, because if the core personnel in our healthcare sector, which forms nurses and doctors, if we have a shortage of it, what are we doing as a government? What have they done to get more people involved like that? Are they doubling up on the amount of medical scholarships that they're giving? Are they sending more Grenadians to pursue a career in nursing? What have they done? So, but before I end my point, I would like to say kudos to all the healthcare workers, all from doctors to orderlies, who've put out their best, particularly in relation to our response to COVID. You guys did a phenomenal job with the little you have. And so I know sometimes those who make the most sacrifices are the less to be rewarded. But we do see what you did for our country, and we must extend appreciation for that.
Certainly an insightful perspective. Now, health is a multifaceted ordeal, and many times we tend to focus on one side of it, which is the physical. But equal to the physical is that of the mental health, because what is the body without the mind? Absolutely nothing, an empty shell. So if your mental faculties are not functioning at full capacity, then it would affect your overall performance to conduct yourself. Allocations towards mental health.
Again, I think mental health is one of the issues that we don't play in society. For us, we see mental health as, when people maybe digging from a garbage bin, and we look at it at a more extreme. So maybe the more schizophrenia sign, instead of looking at it like, mental health could mean anxiety, could mean depression. And when we speak about mental health, we also need to look at it from a very broad perspective. With the crisis, how has it affected all the different sectors in our society. For example, how has COVID affected the operations of the police force? How do we look at morality? How do we look at the relationship they share or the relationship they have with the public? So I think we need to see more allocation towards mental health, not just a facility where people could go and get an injection and without even any diagnosis. What we should see maybe is, let's say, center or building where we could look at psychosocial ways in treating anxiety and depression before we could even think about medicine. Again, I would reiterate the need for research, because sometimes what we tend to do is we tend to judge without really understanding. So what we do is we deal with the issues at face value, and we don't try to get down into the roots as to what is really causing the problem. How do we deal with the problem? How can we be preventative? What preventative measures can we put in place? For example, the increase in suicide, can it be linked to maybe being abused, maybe be what can the links be? So I think we need to go into more research as it relates to mental health, and also have a facility where we can deal with the issue before it gets too out of hand and we have to go to Monge, which is kind of very extreme.
Structure, and you stated that the government tends to focus on glamour as opposed to focusing on the needs of the people. Based on the 2020 second quarter labor force survey, we now see that 66.5% of the households in Grenada do not have enough savings to last them for 3 months. 29.3% of those have no savings at all. If we were to speak hypothetically that we get a spike or the effects of COVID-19 or another disaster of that nature were to affect us, do you think that where the priorities lay at this present moment, we would be better positioned to handle such a crisis or worse off? What is your opinion on this?
Right. Thank you, Garth. So the frank answer is no. In fact, we've been dwindling on a string when it comes to the youth empowerment here, and just any form of anything correlated to professionalism and climbing that stratification ladder, right? So in terms of the cosmetic modifications and that governance of imagery, and this obviously ties into the China and Grenada partnership, which I should be able to highlight on later on. But we see, I'll give you an on the ground example. In studying and working in the US for 3.5 years and coming back, Grenada looked beautiful when I came back. Seeing Silver Sands, seeing the St. George's area, it looked phenomenal. Okay. Now, taking this from to give any form of political jargon or use any big adjectives, it is difficult for us to actually make it within this economy because there is no real substantial care for young people. Okay. Now, if we look at the private sector expansion, we see it's predominantly the tourism sector, and we know why. This is our leading industry for generating revenue, but there's an intense imbalance. We see a complete disregard for local of just this 6-7 month COVID period. We started our own businesses. We created digital platforms. We have entrepreneurs in digital strategies, people who learn how to make value out of products. There was a plethora of people who came out with food companies. Can you imagine if we have not the blueprint, but just a tip of care and investment towards those initiatives, how far we can go? So what is the government telling us? What, we're not entrepreneurial enough to be an actual investment as these deep-pocketed foreign investors, right? So we're placed in a situation where, frankly, we're screwed because we're going against all these foreign investors who have intense savings, who have a stronger currency than us. Then we go abroad, right? Most of us, well, some of us, since we are suffering from an intense brain drain scenario and predicament, we come back to get a $1,500, $2,000 salary, $3,000 if you're lucky, okay? That cannot generate any savings, where rent is what, 1,500, 2,000 tops? Well, sometimes more based on your vicinity, okay? We have no form of financial prowess, no power. The banks will not give us loans. We can't buy land. We can't get any assets. So what are we supposed to do? And anyone who wants to rebut that point with the Empower 2.0 project, or the 2,000 young people who have gained jobs and quote unquote practical experiences, it's not enough. It's frankly not sufficient. I'm not downplaying it's ideology behind it, and that's the case again with this government, that it's a great idea, but when it comes to the implementation, it's dead, right? So I'm saying this within the vein not to deter young people, to say, you know what, let's turn our forces to continue the cycle of Grenada proprietorship. And of course, I can dive into many more things, but for the sake of time, I'll keep it there.
Okay, thank you. As you mentioned, youth development and the position of the youth. I'd like for us to touch on this. In this estimate of revenue and expenditure, we've seen opinions on the feasibility of the proposals, in particular that of the Imani program, the new Imani program, in comparison to what we have seen in previous years. How do you expect this to go in terms of implementation, and what is your overall view on it? Michelle?
Oh, sorry, sorry, I keep muting and forgetting. Right. So, whilst I do believe that the intention of the money program is good, as Jeremy say, the whole cosmetic of things, I think it is how it was sold to be a training program. But if we look at the budget, it was accounted for as a form of employment, right? Which to me is a little bit deceiving. I mean, yes, when we, as young people, when we try to get a job, one of the things they ask for is, to have experience. And one of the things the program does is give training. But in the question of training, what we have seen is a recycling of targeted can learn, because you go in and you learn to answer a phone, you learn to maybe type, but there are other things where I believe they can, they can be trained in different areas. We also need to look at the outcomes or the indicators of success to the program. We have people who've been in the program for, let me say, 7 years, and they're just there with a skill. Why can't we see a program where, okay, you say, all right, you come into the money for 2 years. Let's say you don't have any academic qualification, let's say CX, because if we look at the budget, if we look at the statistics as conducted by the statistical unit, we would see that there is a low rate of persons who have a secondary level education. So why aren't we seeing the program being modified in such a way that the job industry instead of remaining in one sector where they are exploited and the cycle just continues? So as much as the program may have been, the intention may have been good, I think it's kind of, without trying to choose my words here, it's kind of exploitative, if I must say, because the length and the objective of it is still very much unclear.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, we must highlight the fact that based on the survey, approximately 54.6% of our labor force education has stopped at the primary and secondary level combined. So I'm going to ask you all, have you seen anything in this budget that speaks to improvement in this regard? I'm going to start with Ashido.
Can you pass that question on to someone else? I did not. I don't have statistics on that area.
All right, Jeremy.
All right, Rashid, I'm forced to save you. It's largely youth related, and that has sit as the vanguard for youth development for quite a long time. It's the Imani program, and simply put, my thoughts towards that is that it's a seasonal program that had its purpose before, but now it's outlived its purpose, right? Does it need to be completely uprooted? I'm not too sure. I can't speak on that, but I think it's a simple situation where we need a complete overhaul. Now, the lack of transparency in government speaks volumes, and this is something that I really urge Grenadians to look at things, cogitate on things deeply to really understand that nothing just stands by itself. There's an interconnection with everything. The lack of transparency in government is a blatant slap to your face saying that I don't want education, I don't want prudence. Department of our populace, but it deals with the youth as well. And we see this on the ground, right? That is a large number. That's over 50%, right? So that says a lot about our education system. Now, over the years, our education system has become way more robust. We're seeing improvements, but again, it's not enough, right? Now, the ways in which we can do this, that's not my job. That's government's job. This is why we voted you into office, okay? We're not here to give you the blueprint and then tell you, go take it while you take the shine, right? So that is your job to figure that out. And in fact, with the young people, there's, sorry to be blunt, but there's always this preconceived notion that we're incompetent. We can't figure this out. So since we're incompetent, that's for you to figure out. But it's definitely not enough. We do have solutions for this, but this will go on to a whole 30-minute, 1-hour rundown. But I believe that everything that we're seeing, the Empower 2.0 project, the Imani transitionary period, which again has a lot of investment in there. What are we seeing? About 40 million or so, and see all in all, just simply not impressed.
Okay, let me just take a moment to remind the viewers at home tuning in via Zoom and Facebook to pose any questions that you may have. Now, we do live in an era of globalization, the likes of which the world has never seen before. We are more interconnected than ever. And what is driving this era of globalization digital divide. We've seen that over 20% of the students, based on the analysis or the survey rather in the second quarter, did not have access to internet. And I would say that there has been nothing substantive in this budget that spoke to bridging that divide between the have and the have-nots. And that is of major concern to me. If we are looking towards sustainable development, we must first keep up with the times and develop. So to the viewers at home, keep your questions in mind and do state them. Let me get back to Michelle on a point. As we've seen, to meet their monthly expenses. So this brings us to the point of agriculture, because it is absolutely egregious that in a tropical island, there are people hungry. So based on this budget, what is your view on what was allocated for agriculture?
Okay. Again, I would mention research. Now, when you carry out a research, it's because you're looking for empirical evidence. You're looking for empirical evidence to make a decision. Now, if we look at the statistics, right, the information is right there. It says that there is a certain amount of individuals who are not able different. So here we are aware of what the challenges are. However, what we see is that the budget failed to address it. Now, as it relates to agriculture, if we're looking at a crisis, and God forbid, with the recent cases that are being announced, we go back on a state of emergency or a lockdown. Do we have enough in terms of food security that would enable for these individuals who doesn't have income, for those who are not having maybe a proper meal a day, how do we aid in meeting their needs? So what we need to see or needed to see in the budget is ways in which we could strengthen the agriculture industry. And when we talk about strengthening, we also need to look at not just production on a local level, but also production maybe for export. So do we have labs in place? Do they require testing that would enable us to be able to export and be able so we could gain maybe more foreign investment that would help in the country's sustainable development? We also need to look at the linkages with agriculture and the other industries. So if we're talking agricultural development and
or?
So I'll just give a quick response to this. We see it, right? I've been reiterating the Empower program, and for those who may not understand exactly what this entails, according from the horse's mouth in the budget, it says that it's a training course conceptualized to specifically target young males age 18 to 30 from on the block who are unemployed. And it serves as a means of empowering them to be more responsible citizens, exposed to CVQ, civil engineering, plumbing, property and facilities management, so on and so forth. And if you complete this to its entirety, you receive a $2,400 grant fund. Round of applause. All right, I like this. When I saw this in the budget, I said, okay, cool. Now, the only problem is the capacity, right? Why is this extended to just the susceptible men, young men that are quote unquote on the block, which of course is an intense necessity because these guys are heavily disadvantaged, right? But I believe that there needs to be an equality, not just gender, right, which is a debate in itself, but it needs to be expanded within the well-skilled and educated young people like this panel and the people who went to TAM-CC and those who attained their bachelor's and other forms of certification. So I think that, you know, in this case, government has their eyes on it. And this is one thing I notice about the government. It's a way to deflect these issues is that you basically drop a tiny water droplets in the bucket and say like, yeah, we're fully cognizant of what the predicament is. We know that there is a lack of overall youth education, right? But I also want to tie this point into how much this is needed considering the years moving forward, right? Because as we're thinking about the coronavirus situation, we're still looking at this as a health pandemic, and it really transcends that, okay? This is moving into that second phase of more of an economic pandemic for a lot of countries, including those countries that are heavily reliant on tourism, hint, hint, right? So what we're seeing is that we need to recognize more on, again, entrepreneurial sustainability, not just amongst our youth, but amongst the entire populace of Grenada, right? We need to see more funds injected into our local private sector, right? We need to expand that, make it simply more easy for us to get loans, make it easy for us to get government funding, to start doing things. In fact, sometimes instead of just giving us an Imani program, some would argue that if you place that money in the hands, if you take that total of 40.4 million and place it proportionally within the hands of a lot of young people, you'll be surprised where that goes. If we actually have the physical cash to start our own businesses, you will be surprised where that goes and how long it takes, how long that can take Grenada. So we need to ensure that we understand that second wave of this pandemic, which is that growing fear of multilateralism and international cooperation and coordination, right? There's going to be this stigma that's attached to people coming in with a virus, or a stigma attached to tourism, a stigma attached to even imported goods and services, right? So while we are paying attention to this growing cancer of protectionism amongst all these countries, it solidifies the point that we need a complete economic overhaul that creates alternative avenues of revenue generation and putting the youth within the crux, within the epicenter of that initiative.
All right.
Just to add, right? If we're going back to the holy money and the education, the thingy, I believe that the government cannot do it alone, but maybe the agencies or the programs that we see working instead of coming and joining forces. So maybe there's a program that is working but it lacks technical support. how the difference here should be, as again, come back to collaboration where you give aid because you cannot do it alone. But when you have young people trying to make a difference, young people coming up with initiatives, what you see is that it's stifled. And another thing too, sometimes you want to get into the program, but because of maybe how vocal you are or what party the supervisors think you represent, you are denied an opportunity. So if we're looking at an effective program with a balance of skills and a balance of educational qualification, then we need to have an independent board to which the young people are selected, because young people between the ages of what's the mandate, 18 to whatever, it never specified young people that are green or young people that are red or young people that are yellow. So there's a lot of instances and a lot of sectors that exist in society where we need to stop playing the party politics and look at the overall development of our society, which is Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique. So I think we need to put the little pettiness aside, learn to collaborate and learn to do things fairly and think of the big picture and not just what is before us.
All right, Michelle, note taken. I have a question directly for Ms. Charles. In the context of the time that we live in, do you think that adequate funds have been allocated towards healthcare, and where do you think the government could get these funds from to improve our healthcare system?
Okay, first of all, I am not in a position to speak to how much funds should be allocated in the healthcare sector. The projected amount was $94.9 billion, like I said before, $1 million, sorry. Like I said before, the minister seemed confident in that allotment. What it means to me is really whether or not we can have an effective, responsive, affordable healthcare sector for all Grenadians. You see, we have a healthcare sector that caters to the haves, and that sector leaves the haves not hanging. So, so oftentimes you see a motorcade or you may see a box placed at a supermarket, or with a family seeking financial assistance from the public to help a loved one who is sick, and either our healthcare sector cannot provide the services necessary for healing, or plain and simple, we do not have the personnel to take care of that, and so that loved one has to travel. You see, it's very significant for me that we have St. George's University, which is a reputable medical university, and yet we have a small, our population is 110,000, if that, and yet for all, year after year after year, we are faced with the same challenges in our healthcare sector that, to me, the government seem probably, maybe the members of government, maybe they don't live here, because you cannot be living here as a citizen of Grenada and continuing to offer the nation this kind of health services. We deserve better as a people. And before I end, I want to focus on this vaccine, because you see, COVID-19 has transformed all economies worldwide. And yes, we did an okay job in terms of how we handled it. And we, meaning not so much so the authorities. I'm not really about to give the authorities any sort of significant credit, but more so I want to put my credit towards the healthcare practitioners and the staff at the Maurice Bishop International Airport, because they are doing what should be done in terms of ensuring that the quarantine protocols are put in place. But it seems as if those rules and those protocols are not for all. And hence, like we know the situation that is unfolding right now. And it seemed to be a very chaotic one, right? All because, the quarantine protocols were not issued or adhered to all, and that's a significant issue. So that aside, I want to talk about the vaccine. No, there is a Pfizer vaccine that has been approved by the UK. They have been using it already, and it's the regulators say it is 95% effective, tested on 40,000 people already, and it does no harm to our body. For Grenada, which is highly dependent on tourism, this vaccine situation is a significant one, because it will boil down to whether or not one has to be vaccinated, take this Pfizer vaccine to enter our country, whether or not will it be made mandatory for our citizens to take this vaccine in order for us to travel abroad. But for our country, a lot of things here regarding this vaccine are significant. From cost, who will cover the cost? Will it be a cost that if we do decide, let's say the vaccine is not mandatory and we decide we're going to take it, or will the citizen incur that cost, or will the government do so? I know Mrs. Steele mentioned that the PCR test cost will no longer be covered by the government. A cost of $405 will now be the responsibility of travelers to cover. He did not give an alternative. And I'm trying to figure, okay, whose responsibility is it to protect the state? If someone has to be in Grenada and cannot afford $405 to cover their PCR test, what happens then? So we have to look at cost for this particular vaccine. We have to look at distribution. How will this vaccine be distributed? Are we going to give it to frontline workers first? Are we going to start with government officials, and their families? Or are we going to start with children, the elderly? All of these things we have to factor in, including storage, because the storage of this particular vaccine is critical. And we have to figure whether or not we have the necessary facilities to do so. So health in itself here is a serious matter, from just Grenadians having the basic access to essential healthcare services, to our hospitals and clinics having the necessary personnel and equipment to do a good job, to now our handling of this whole COVID-19 pandemic, the vaccine, and so on. It's just so intensive. We need a lot of time to discuss it in its entirety.
All right, thank you very much. I would like for Michelle and Jeremy to chime in on this as well.
I'm not chiming in on that. I'm not going to tarnish such an eloquent point. I'm gonna just let that sit and marinate. So I plead the fifth on this one.
I think I share the same sentiment. Whilst I was listening, I was hoping she would touch on the SGU issue in terms of being one of the best medical schools, and she did. That is the only input I would have had.
Okay, great. So I have a question directly for Michelle. Is lack of education among the youth one of the main reasons so many end up in the Imani program?
I could only make an inference. I don't have any statistics to prove that, but I'll use Bridge as a case in point, right? About 6 months ago, we launched the Bridge program, and based on the indicators and based on some of the things that I've been seeing, because we have a whole registration process, there's a lot of persons, because what we do, we cater for adults who were denied secondary level education for some reason or the other. Maybe they got pregnant, maybe they didn't have the financial resources, and maybe because of the cost to continue at a private institution, they're unable to. So we decided that we would come together and provide a free service, a few tutoring service, where they just have to pay the registration and make $10 contribution towards the SPs. But one of the things we've realized is that there are lots of students. So we have over 360 students, and a lot of them are from the Imani program. And if you look at it, like some of the subjects that they're doing is like more maths and English. So yes, in terms of making an inference or a educated assumption, it can be seen that lack of education could be one of the contributing factors to why people go into the Imani program, but also lack of opportunities. We cannot downplay the fact that there are a lack of opportunities, because there are a lot of persons within the Imani program who have graduated from St. George's University. I mean, to them, it's not what they want, but it's like, I have to settle for less, or I have to settle for little until better can continue. And that is the state that our society, Grenada, is really, really in, because we have this dependency syndrome. And what this program does is it facilitates and it fuels the dependency that exists in society, because the Imani program is a quick fix so that the government don't have to provide jobs. And then we as citizens, we sit down and we think that the government is doing us a favor. We fail to hold those we trust. And it's a trust, because if I vote for you, it means that I trust you enough to represent my interest. And if I trust you, then I should be able to question what it is you're doing. I should be able to have a say in how it is you're executing the things that would affect me. So let's just take, for example, the little town hall meetings that are happening now. Why can't we have little consulting or consultative meetings when it comes to, we know every year we prepare a budget. When it comes trickle downs to the timing, we go, our representative go out and they find out actually what our needs are. Then they can factor that into the budget, so the budget is reflective, not from what they see from their perspective, but based on the recommendations that are given by those that are most affected. So again, the Imani program is not just people who are not educated, it's people who lack opportunities because it is not provided.
All right, thank you very much, Michelle. Unfortunately, we are out of time. So I would like to thank the panelists for the insights and everybody who made this possible. And we do look forward to having more discussions with you in the future. Now, before we leave, we, the youth of the Grenada movement, would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to everybody who tuned in, to everybody who posed questions. And we would like to remind you that in this social contract, where we live in a democratic society, onus is on us, as well as the government, to